It was already cold. I don't know how long I'd been sitting there at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around the mug like it could still give me something. Outside, the Bradford pear tree in the front yard was finally blooming. White flowers, messy and brief, the kind that don't last. My husband Gerald used to say they smelled like something died. I used to laugh at that. Now I just watched them through the window and thought about how right he was about so many things. It was a Tuesday morning in late February. I remember because I had a dentist appointment I kept almost cancelling, and the calendar on the fridge had a little star I'd drawn on that date 3 months earlier. The star meant finalise the cruise deposit. I had been planning this trip for 14 months, not dreaming about it, not browsing Pinterest boards, actually planning spreadsheets, printed itineraries, a folder on my laptop labelled Family Cruise 2026 with 16 subfolders inside. I had called Royal Caribbean twice to confirm accessible cabin arrangements because my sister-in-law walks with a cane. I had researched excursion options in Nassau and Cozumel. I had made a packing list with suggested items for each family member, colour-coded by age group, because that is the kind of woman I am. The kind who shows up, the kind who makes things happen and then steps back so everyone else can enjoy them. I am 64 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years in Savannah, Georgia. I know how to organise things. I know how to take care of people. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to notice that I had become very, very good at being invisible while doing it. Gerald passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to argue with it. We had 38 years together, and I won't say they were all easy, but they were ours. After he died, I did what women like me do. I kept moving. I kept showing up. I cooked Sunday dinners. I drove to Atlanta every other month to babysit my grandchildren. I sent birthday cards with checks inside, real checks, because I still don't trust Venmo. I was the constant, the one who held the shape of the family together when everything else kept shifting. The cruise was supposed to be my gift to all of them. That's how I thought of it. A gift. Gerald and I had always talked about taking the whole family on a big trip. It was one of those someday things we kept folding and putting in a drawer. After he died, I decided I wasn't going to wait for someday anymore. I took the money from a CD that had matured, 34 years of careful saving, and I told myself this is what he would have wanted. A memory, something the grandkids could carry. I called my son in March of last year. His name is Darren. He's 41, works in commercial real estate, lives in a suburb of Atlanta with his wife Noelle and their 2 children, Aubrey, who is 9, and Miles, who is 6. Miles looks exactly like Gerald. That's not relevant to the story, but it's something I think about. I told Darren about the cruise idea. I told him I wanted to book a 7-night Caribbean sailing out of Port Canaveral, departing the Friday before Thanksgiving, back before the holiday so no one's plans got disrupted. I told him I was paying for everything, cabins, flights, shore excursions, the whole thing. Darren said, and I wrote this down because it made me feel so good I wanted to keep it, he said, "Mom, that is the most generous thing I've ever heard. We are absolutely there." I called my daughter Patrice next. She lives in Charlotte. She cried a little, said she'd been feeling distant from everyone and that this was exactly what the family needed. I called my younger brother Theodore and his wife Louise, the one with the cane. They said yes before I even finished the sentence. Over the next 6 months, I collected passport information, dietary restrictions, confirmation numbers. I put a shared Google Calendar together. Patrice helped me set it up. I booked 5 cabins. 2 of them had balconies. I paid the deposits on my credit card and set up auto-pay for the balance installments. I did all of this myself, quietly, the way I do everything. I told myself I wasn't doing it to be thanked. I told myself I wasn't doing it because I loved them. Both of those things were true, but I'll admit now, sitting at that cold coffee table, that there was a third thing underneath both of them. I wanted to be seen, not praised. Just seen. I wanted someone to look at what I'd built for us and understand, without me saying a word, that I was still here, that I still mattered, that the family didn't only exist because I kept pouring myself into it. I should have said that out loud a long time ago. The text came on a Sunday evening. I was on the phone with Louise talking about whether she needed a shower seat in the cabin. When I heard the notification, I finished the call, picked up my phone and read it. It was from Darren. Hey, Mom. So, Noelle and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if we do a separate trip this time around. She feels like the bigger group dynamic is stressful for her and the kids, and she'd really prefer something smaller, with just our immediate family. I hope you understand. Not trying to make a big deal out of this. It's not personal. I read it 3 times. Not personal. I sat very still for a moment. The TV was on in the other room, some home renovation show, the sound of a sledgehammer going through drywall. I thought about how Noelle had not come to Gerald's funeral. She said Aubrey had an ear infection. Aubrey was 5 at the time. I had nodded and said, of course, these things happen. I thought about the Christmas 2 years ago when Noelle made a comment about how I always take over at family gatherings, and Darren hadn't said a single word. I had driven home in the dark on I-16 and cried at a rest stop outside of Macon. I thought about the 5 cabin deposits. I thought about the flights I'd booked for Darren's family, direct from Atlanta, because Noelle doesn't like layovers. I thought about the balcony cabin I had specifically chosen for them because Noelle had once mentioned she likes to have coffee outside in the morning. I thought about Aubrey asking me last Easter if I was coming to her dance recital, and how I had rearranged my entire schedule and driven 3 hours in the rain to sit in the front row. Then I thought, it's not personal. I didn't respond that night. I put the phone face down on the counter and went to bed at 8 o'clock. I lay there in the dark and looked at the ceiling and asked the ceiling what I was supposed to do with this. The ceiling didn't answer. Gerald would have had something to say. He always had something to say. He always had something to say. In the morning, I made coffee. Real coffee, in the percolator he gave me for our anniversary 17 years ago. I sat down at the table and I read the text again. Then I opened my laptop. I went first to the Royal Caribbean website and pulled up the group reservation. 5 cabins, 14 passengers, paid in full every installment. My name was the primary account holder, my credit card, my email, my phone number on every confirmation. Then I opened my email and sent a message to the Royal Caribbean group coordinator, a woman named Terry I had spoken to 3 times and who had been unfailingly kind. I told her I needed to make some modifications to the reservation. I needed to remove 2 cabins, the balcony cabin booked for 4 passengers, and a secondary cabin I had reserved as overflow space in case the kids wanted a separate room to watch movies. I asked about the refund timeline. Terry responded within the hour. Because the departure was more than 90 days out, I was within the cancellation window for a full refund on those cabins. The money would return to my credit card in 7 to 10 business days. I also called the airline and cancelled the 4 round-trip tickets I'd booked for Darren's family. Because I had used points for 2 of those tickets, I got the points back. The other 2, I took the travel credit. I did not tell anyone I was doing this. I went to my Tuesday Bible study that morning. I sat next to my friend Carolyn, who has known me since our children were in diapers together. I did not say anything. I sang the hymns. I drank the bad coffee they always have in the fellowship hall. I drove home. That afternoon, Darren called. I let it ring. He called again 20 minutes later. I picked up. He said he'd been thinking and he felt bad about the text and he wanted to explain it better. I said, take your time. He said Noelle just really needed a break from large family dynamics. It wasn't about me specifically. She loved me. They both loved me. But the stress of coordinating everyone was a lot. He said he hoped I understood. I said I did. He paused. Then he asked if I could transfer him the deposit money he had sent me. He had put in $400 back in October as his share of a family expense pool I'd set up through Zelle. He said since they weren't going, it made sense for me to return it. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened inside me when he said that. There was no explosion, no crying. I have been a 4th grade teacher. I know how to hold my face very still while something falls apart behind my eyes. I told him I would look into it. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table, the same chair, and I thought about the $400. Then I thought about the 14 months, the 16 subfolders, the 6 phone calls to the cruise line, the dietary forms, the direct flights with no layovers, the balcony cabin for the morning coffee, the dance recital in the rain. I thought, the $400 is the least interesting part of this story. I called Patrice that evening. I told her what had happened. I told her calmly, without drama, the way you tell someone a fact. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. That's not okay." She didn't try to explain Noelle. She didn't suggest I look at it from a different angle. She just said, it wasn't okay. That was the first time in this whole situation that I felt like someone had actually looked at me. I asked Patrice if she was still coming. She said, "Mom, I wouldn't miss it for anything in this world." Theodore and Louise said the same thing when I called them. Louise actually laughed and said, "More balcony time for us." I refunded Darren's $400 the next day, every cent, because I am not someone who holds on to other people's money, and because I wanted to be completely clean in what came next. Then I called Carolyn. Carolyn has been a widow for 6 years. She and her husband Raymond traveled everywhere together, and since he died, she hasn't been on a single trip. She always says she doesn't want to travel alone. I told her she wouldn't be alone. I told her I had a balcony cabin available, fully paid. All she had to do was get herself to Orlando. She cried. Then I called my friend Deb, who I taught alongside for 22 years. Deb just retired last spring and has been saying for months that she needs something to look forward to. I told her the same thing. She said yes so fast I had to ask her to repeat herself. I opened the reservation and added Carolyn and Deb in place of the 4 passengers I had removed. It was the most peaceful administrative task I have ever completed in my life. The trip was in November. We sailed out of Port Canaveral on a Friday evening, the sun going down behind us as the ship moved out of the harbour. I stood on Theodore and Louise's balcony. They had the bigger one, and I watched the Florida coastline disappear. There was a particular feeling of watching land get smaller and smaller until it's gone. I don't know that I'd ever really noticed it before. That evening I noticed it very much. Everything on that shore, the things I hadn't said, the apologies that didn't come, the text that said it's not personal, it all just got smaller and smaller, and then it was water in every direction. Carolyn appeared beside me with a glass of white wine and handed me one without asking. That's the mark of a real friend. She didn't say anything for a while. We just stood there. Then she said, "Raymond would have loved this." I said, "Gerald would have complained about the buffet and then gone back 4 times. We laughed until Louise came out to see what was happening, and then she started laughing too, even though she'd missed the joke. And Theodore put on a Temptation song from somewhere inside the cabin and turned it up too loud, and that was how the trip began. Nassau was warm and bright, and smelled like sunscreen and fried plantains. Deb bought a hat she wore every single day for the rest of the trip. Louise found a vendor selling handmade jewelry and spent 45 minutes negotiating, which she said was the most fun she'd had in years. I sat in a beach chair with my feet in the sand and read 80 pages of a novel I'd been meaning to finish since January. I did not think about anything except the sentence I was reading. Cozumel was coral reefs and turquoise water and a fish taco that might have been the best thing I have ever eaten. Carolyn and I did a snorkeling excursion even though neither of us had snorkeled in at least 20 years. We were by far the oldest people on the boat. Our guide, a young man named Marco who couldn't have been more than 25, was patient and kind, and told us we were doing great every time we came up for air. At one point, I floated face down over a brain coral the size of a kitchen table, the most extraordinary thing, perfectly still in the warm green water. And I thought, I almost didn't come. I almost let them take this from me. I did not see Darren's family in the Bahamas or Cozumel. I hoped they had a nice trip, wherever they went. I mean that without bitterness, which surprises me a little, but there it is. The night before we docked back in Florida, the 5 of us had dinner at the specialty restaurant on board, the Italian one, with the good bread. We split 2 bottles of wine and ordered dessert twice and stayed at the table long past when they were trying to reset it for the next service. Theodore gave a toast. He stood up and held his glass and said, "To the woman who shows up, who has always shown up, and who finally let us show up for her." I put my napkin over my face because I am not someone who cries at dinner tables if I can help it. I was not entirely successful. When we got back to Savannah, I found a voicemail from Darren. He said he'd heard from Patrice that the trip had been wonderful and that he was glad I had a good time and that maybe we could all do something together next year. He hoped there were no hard feelings. I listened to it twice, then I set the phone down and made myself a cup of coffee. I haven't called him back yet. not because I'm punishing him, not because I've decided I'm done with my son. I haven't, I won't, he is my child. And that doesn't stop. But because I am 64 years old, and I have spent a very long time making other people comfortable at the cost of my own clarity, I want to be clear with myself before I speak. I want to know what I actually need to say, and say only that, without softening it into something easier to swallow. What I know is this: I am not an ATM with a heartbeat. I am not a background character in the story of my own family. I planned that trip because I love the people in my life. But love doesn't mean handing over every resource I have and then making myself small enough that no one has to feel guilty about taking them. Love, real love, has a shape. It has a form, and it requires that the person giving it still exists at the center of her own life. I put a new photo on the refrigerator last week. It's the 5 of us on the deck of the ship. Nassau in the background, all of us squinting into the sun. Caroline is wearing her enormous hat. Theodore is doing something ridiculous with his arms. Louise is laughing. Deb has her eyes closed because she always blinks at the wrong moment. I look happy. Actually happy, not the kind of happy you perform for other people, but the kind that lives behind your eyes and stays there after the picture is taken. Gerald would have wanted me to have more pictures like that. I think that's what I was always saving for. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're 64 and you finally have enough distance from your own life to see it clearly. What I did for my family wasn't wrong. Planning that cruise, paying for those cabins, booking those flights, none of that was a mistake. The mistake was something quieter than that. It was the belief that if I gave enough, consistently enough, for long enough, the people I loved would naturally understand what I needed without me ever having to say it. That's not generosity. That's a transaction dressed up as love, and I was the only one who didn't know the terms. Darren didn't become careless overnight. I think back now on all the times I smoothed things over, absorbed the sting of a thoughtless comment, drove home in the dark and cried alone rather than say that hurt me. Every time I did that, I was teaching him, without a single word, that I didn't require much, that I would absorb whatever came and still show up Sunday. Children learn what we demonstrate, not what we declare. I demonstrated for decades that I was inexhaustible. So he treated me that way. That's not blame, that's just cause and effect. What I'm prouder of than anything, prouder than cancelling those tickets, prouder than sailing to Nassau without a single apology from anyone, is that I didn't make the decision from anger. I made it from clarity. There's a difference, and I think it matters enormously. Anger burns through you and leaves a mess. Clarity is something else. Clarity is standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, reading a text for the 3rd time, and simply deciding, this is not acceptable and I don't have to accept it. Caroline told me something on the ship, the last night, while we were finishing the 2nd bottle of wine. She said the bravest thing a woman can do at our age is stop pretending she has no needs. I wrote that down when I got back to the cabin. I've thought about it nearly every day since. Intelligence, I've learned, isn't just about knowing things. It's about being honest enough with yourself to see a situation as it actually is, not as you wish it were. I wished for years that Darren would see me. I kept waiting for that moment of recognition. But wishing is not a strategy. At some point, a woman has to look at the evidence in front of her and respond to what's real. And resilience. I used to think resilience meant enduring, staying, absorbing. I built my entire identity around that kind of strength. But there's another kind of resilience that nobody puts on motivational posters. It's the kind that says, I will not keep funding my own erasure. That kind takes more courage than enduring ever did. I still love my son. I will call him back. But I will call him back as myself. Fully, clearly, with something to say that I've actually thought through. Not to punish him. To be honest with him, maybe for the first time in a long time. The photo is still on my refrigerator. All 5 of us, squinting into the Bahamian sun. That picture is proof that joy doesn't wait for permission. You can build it yourself, with the people who actually show up. That's what I'm taking into whatever comes next.